which is a dictatorship country. And America is that China has this thing, exactly the same that you talk about the torture after 9/11 to Muslims. Secret trial. They don't have the trial to public. They just say that you're guilty and we can do that to you. And second, the South torture position. I have seen the pictures. It's organized and you're absolutely right. It is practice and it need professionals to do it. It's horrible. And I thought that's violating human rights. And and it seems like it's not a secret. It's not right. And people even talk about even try to justify. They're terrorists. If you don't use torture, they're gonna kill people. Do you want 100 people die, or do you want that 2 people to torture? It's ridiculous. How is it even allowed to happen in America? I thought we have law against that. That is human right. Even though that person is a terrorist, it still have right to 7 human rights, the right to be safe.
Right.
I'm so angry right now. I cannot think of the rest. I'm just shocked that China, of course, we don't have law. Like dictatorship, really. Like there's no law. The government, they can do whatever they like. They can just kidnap you from the middle of the night and and your family can know about that. They can even sue the government, or the family are gonna keep in control by the government. They're gonna put a spy, and I just kind of losing my mind here that America. I know it's not a great country. Let me just say that it got a lot of problems. When I first came here 3 years ago, I thought America was this land of freedom, but no. As I know more about it got a lot of problems. But it's shocking tonight to me. I know CIA is not, it's not a virtuous organization, but it's shocking to me that 9/11 is not like 20 years ago. It's within 10 years, and people know about it, and it's America, and that happened, and people weren't justified. What is it? So sorry, I'm really angry, emotional.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And I'm just wondering, like, how does this happen? Because I have seen TV shows, sorry about that.
No, of course.
That even though you are, the police, they suspect you as like a, suspect that they cannot torture, they cannot harm you, right? You can sue the police, and they have other ways, kind of like terror, like try to like harm you, but not physically harm you, right? So I don't know how does this, the American public, not all of them, well, some of them know. It's not like a secret, like the government probably try to hide, but it's not that like in China that it's like completely in the dark. The public is not going to have access to it. So we did have the access, and we do still now. You're talking that, and no one arrests you. So
right, exactly.
Well, in China, that will happen.
Right.
But it just amazed me. I just question this function. The foundation of this country is shaking. The law, and I thought the law and freedom and the human. I don't know about human rights.
We've signed a lot of treaties.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just sorry. That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's shocking that I don't know how does it allow to happen in the first place.
So that's a great question.
I'm sorry.
How is it allowed? So, no, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And what you describe, of course, is exactly how it works in China, too. And the family then is afraid to speak. If you lose your person, you don't say anything. It's like that in the many regimes. One thing that changed after September 11th is that something that the U.S. used to do in other countries suddenly came home, and we were doing it ourselves instead of training other people to do it, which was the usual way. And suddenly this thing that was absolutely forbidden, we opened ourselves up to asking again, well, maybe we should allow that. But what do other people think? In a nation of laws, how does it happen? Yeah.
I was just curious, during your speaking tour, what was the most effective argument you had that seemed to change people's minds? Because I think oftentimes the problem with forums like this is everybody already kind of agrees and jaded.
Right. And so one of the places I talked several times was at retirement homes. And a lot of the people who came to hear my talks were veterans, many of them of Korea and World War II. And they were absolutely not convinced. And the most useful arguments were instrumental arguments. They were arguments that said, look, this doesn't work. You don't actually get actionable battlefield intelligence. And look, you were protected by the Geneva Conventions. We should protect the people we pick up on the battlefield. So they were the instrumental arguments. But people who were already disposed to believe that torture was necessary to protect themselves, it was a very hard sell that it wasn't. And so my approach is sort of to say, well, what kind of country do you want to be? When we talk about national security, what is it about us, about our nation, that we think is, that is valuable, that we want to keep secure? What would you say are American values? And then if we can get people talking about the values they think that are the good things about this country, sometimes that gives you a beginning place to start your argument from. That you and I can both agree, the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they're endowed by by their creator with certain rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If people are willing to say, throw down and say, those are the things that when I talk about I love America, that's what I'm talking about, then there's sometimes an opening place.
Speaking, so in terms of self-evident truths, I was really shocked by the story you told about how there was a definition supplied for what torture is, and how it was systematically every element of it was redefined to allow for torture. And that question is how is it that I don't mean to simplify it either, but I'm just sort of wondering how is it that individuals can allow themselves to be held hostage by a kind of argumentative language. So you know what I'm trying to say? So the same thing is obvious in torture, but they can say, but it fulfills this definition. And how do people allow themselves to be?
So it's really interesting because these two guys who wrote that particular memo, one of them now has an endowed chair at the UC Berkeley Law School. He's got this, permanent position. The other one, that's John Yoo. Jay Bybee is a federal judge now. And all of these people wrote these memos, and this wasn't the only one. There were many memos written, and in my two books, I quote from a lot of them. And if you go to the National Security Archives, you can find all of these memos, the ones that have been declassified. And almost always, the reason they were written in the first place is that somebody wanted, pardon my French, their ass covered. Somebody wanted to be sure that if they went ahead and did what they were planning to do, that somebody higher up than they were, legal counsel, would say it was okay, so they couldn't be prosecuted. And in fact, some of the rules and regulations that were promulgated said that relying on legal counsel's advice is a good enough reason. So in the case of John Yoo, I would say, based on the other work that he's done as a lawyer, that he has your basic neoconservative approach to the world. He's an authoritarian. He's, I would not say, not a Democrat with a small d. So it's in line with his understanding, not of the letter of the law, but the purpose of the law. Okay, yeah.
So you mentioned these people who were responsible for, I guess, the drafting of these memos, as well as certain higher-ups who were important in implementing them. But how would you go about, I guess, stepping around what seems to be a habit of prosecuting the instruments as opposed to the architects of these programs, and has anything been done yet to begin it?
Yeah, so I wrote a whole book about this called American Nuremberg.
Yeah.
But basically we have a lot of problems. Number one, there is a court in the world that exists to try war criminals if their own countries won't try them. It's called the International Criminal Court. Up until now, it has only tried people from Africa. But people who have done terrible things. However, the United States signed the treaty that created this court. This court was actually first envisioned by the people who created the tribunal at Nuremberg to try the Nazi criminals for the crimes of the Nazi war and the Holocaust. And it took another 50 years to actually get this thing created. The U.S. signed the treaty, but the Senate never ratified it. And in 2002, the Bush administration wrote to the organization where the ICC is and said, we are rescinding, we're taking back our signature, and we are never going to ratify it. The U.S. Congress then passed a law making it illegal for anyone to assist in bringing any U.S. person to trial at the International Criminal Court. And it even went so far, the law said, as if somebody actually found themselves there by accident, that the U.S. military would be mobilized to free them. Some people called it the Invade the Hague law. This is a problem. It means that the main international place is cut off. When President Obama took office on the 20th of January in 2009, he issued an executive order saying the CIA had to stop using these particular enhanced interrogation techniques. At the same time, he said, however, we need to look forward and not backwards. And the Justice Department announced the next day that there would be no prosecutions. I happen to think that of all the crimes that have been committed in the War on Terror, actually the worst one and the source of all the others is the illegal invasion of Iraq. Because it was actually to invade Iraq that the first torture happened. The first people who were tortured report that the things they were trying to get them to say was that there was a connection between Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. That connection did not exist. But Abu Zubaydah and a number of other people were tortured to get people to say that because they wanted something they could go on to justify invading Iraq. And out of that, we have the destruction of an entire, what was once a completely industrialized, developed country. We have 14 million people who have had to leave their homes in Syria, 5 million of them outside of the country, the biggest refugee crisis since the end of World War II, which was part of the program that people like Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney came into the White House with, and they had told the world, they wrote it out in the 1990s, a whole program that started with deposing Saddam Hussein and then destabilizing Syria and remaking the Middle East. Anyway, so that kind of almost leaves maybe a people's tribunal, which was done during the Vietnam War by Jean-Paul Sartre and Bertrand Russell. They actually put together a tribunal in Sweden and I think Norway or Finland. The two meetings were held. And I've been in touch with some folks who are interested in possibly doing something like that here. But the reality is, with the news cycle that we live in, with the way that news disappears in 24 hours, you could put years into planning that. You could bring the victims, the survivors, to testify, and maybe nobody would even notice. What I think now is we have to stop it from continuing. We have to, I really think that part of the reason that Donald Trump can get up and say, you know, I'd bring back waterboarding in a heartbeat, is because of the impunity, because nobody's been held accountable. What I will say is Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, George W. Bush, they don't leave the country. Because there are other countries where there are laws that would permit them to be tried. George W. Bush in 2014 was supposed to go address an evangelical conference in Switzerland, and he heard that someone had sworn out a warrant for his arrest, a Swiss judge. He didn't go. So at the very least, we're stuck with them here in this country. Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned cowardice, and I think that plays a critical role in the continuation of these, atrocities. I mean, you can go on for hours talking about the things we do domestically and overseas. But it strikes me that within the government itself, within academia, within, every social institution that exists, there's intellectual, ethical, and physical cowardice that just, people benefit from the system as it currently exists, and have no motivation to change, or say, well, these things might happen, but I'm okay. I'm benefiting. And I've seen, whether it's LGBT rights or if it's environmentalism. You've got people in the country that all of a sudden care about environmentalism because there's fracking or until something affects someone personally, it seems that it's difficult to overcome this apathy. And when you mentioned, building a movement to stop this from continuing, have you found anything in particular that's been effective in overcoming this cowardice?
So that's really interesting. Some of the people who I think are doing the most valuable work on this are the people in a group called Critical Resistance, which is actually a prison abolition group. And it's mostly, but not entirely, African American. So I have a friend, Rachel Hersing, who lives across the bay in East Oakland. And what they're working on is ways that communities can deal with genuinely dangerous and emergency situations without necessarily involving the police. And ways that people in the community who have genuinely been harmed by other people in the community can find a form, something that feels like justice to them, that doesn't necessarily mean bringing in the criminal justice system, because they know that that's only going to make things more dangerous for themselves and others. And to be willing to even entertain that idea does take a certain amount of courage, because poor communities can be dangerous communities. And even within those communities, there are very conflicted ideas about whether or not you want the police there. Some people do because it makes them feel safer. Many people don't because it doesn't. And so the people who are having these really brave conversations are people of color working in these communities, and it's really impressive. So that's one locus where I see the work being done. There are a number of traditional organizations. One of them, of course, is School of America's Watch. And how many of you know that they do this thing every year in November? It's going to be. It's
in 2 weeks.
Right.
It happens in Nogales.
In Nogales, right. Yeah, they decided to move it from where they've been holding it in the southern United States to Nogales on the border to deal with, the realities of the unbelievable violence of the narco state that Mexico has become. The U.S. has assisted, unfortunately. But yeah, so those activities. There's an organization.
I'm sorry, what is that, Peter?
It's so in response to the assassination of Father Romero, who was a liberation. He was part of the Catholic Church and involved in
El Salvador.
There was a group of some Jesuit priests in the United States that created this organization called School of the America's Watch to integrate both the victims in Central and South America and the Caribbean, and then those people with resistance in the United States to kind of protest the policies that were training people, assassins, torturers.
The School of the Americas was an actual place in Fort Benning, Georgia, and it still exists. It has a new name now. And before that, it was in Panama. And it's where members of militaries and police forces, especially in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when the U.S. was really supporting dictatorships in Latin America, where they would come and get trained, basically, in torture. And so the School of America's Watch was developed to keep an eye on them. And every year in November, they have a big gathering. It started out as a very small gathering, and now it's grown to thousands of people. And it was always at Fort Benning, Georgia, but this year they've moved it to the border to Nogales, the border with Mexico. Yeah.
This will be, I think, the last question because we're running out of time.
Okay.
When you were reading your definition of torture, I kept thinking about like stop and frisk laws and kind of the fear that so many African Americans are expressing now about all of these shootings of black people, and that in itself seems like it's institutionalized because it's sources. And so, like, is that considered torture because it doesn't have the intentionality or the explicit intention?
The intention is certainly to control a population.
Right.
But what I would say about that is it doesn't necessarily involve, at least if it happens to you once, the kind of severe physical suffering that torture does. However, there are people who have had it happen to them, tens of times. If it happens to you 50 times, if it happens to you every time you leave your home, that becomes a form of psychological torture that that you, whether it happens in that moment or not, that you are liable to being forced to be stopped and frisked. Absolutely, it becomes a means of state control, for sure. And, I want to say something about the police shootings, because one of the mysteries to me, I worked during the 80s on the Central America solidarity movement, and one of the problems we had was here are these wars going on that our country was supporting, and nobody knew about them because you just couldn't get anyone to pay attention. And the mystery is how all of a sudden something becomes a story. And what Black Lives Matter, and Alicia Garza, who's one of the three founders, who also used to be the executive director of an organization I was connected with in San Francisco, an amazing woman. So what they have managed to do is they have forced the rest of the country to pay attention to something that has been going on for decades in these communities, but we're only now hearing about it. Now it makes the national news. And in fact, the BBC now reports every time a black man is shot by the police. They reported another one today. This stuff, it's not a surprise to those communities, but it's definitely something. And so I think that some of the most important work that's going to be done on these issues is going to be led by the people who've been leading the prison abolition movement and groups like Black Lives Matter. And, to the extent that we can find a way to put in our little, grano de arena, our little grain of sand, we should. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.